Every time I'd use the DMT, I'd get really annoyed, to be honest, and that's not a fault of the weapon. The weapon's phenomenal. This is one of the best weapons in the game, I think. But when I would use it, I'm always expecting the consistency of the DMR from Halo Reach. And funny enough though, this weapon actually got an ornament based on the DMR from Halo Reach, where the front and the little guard by the trigger is similar or nearly exactly the same as the DMR from Halo Reach, and the sights are just a lot cleaner. Not to mention, it is called Dead Man's Revenge, which is DMR for short. Anyways, not to derail, I would always expect the consistency of the DMR from Reach on this weapon, which meant being able to hip fire from pretty much any range and land at least body shots all the time. And when I'd use this weapon, I found it to be not that consistent. And the worst part is it was even really inconsistent at close range. I'd expect that you want to be able to hip fire this weapon reliably at like what, 25 to 30 meters at least, and even in that range it wasn't able to do that as a scout rifle. It was so inconsistent, and that led me to drop it. I wanted to use this weapon a lot. I love the design and I love what it does. I love what it's inspired by, and I just wasn't able to get a grasp on it, especially when seeing how consistent it was for mouse and keyboard players. I really just couldn't compete, and whenever I take this out on controller, the entire lobby on PC turns into DMTs that are going to perform better than mine. However, I have to say that with this update, they gave a buff to DMT to its accuracy and its stability, which I gotta admit, it does actually make it a lot better on controller. I noticed immediately that there were shots landing that I hadn't been able to land, or would probably quote unquote whiff or not connect or feel inconsistent before, especially in close range. It connects a lot more headshots. Now, granted, I think that the mouse and keyboard version, or like, you know, mouse and keyboard's little benefits and precision naturally lend itself better to this weapon, and it's noticeable. I think a lot more headshots still connect for mouse and keyboard players. It's still better performing on mouse and keyboard, but if you're a controller player looking to take advantage of this phenomenal weapon, then I think now might be the time. It feels a lot more consistent. Like I mentioned, you're able to actually hip fire, I want to say confidently, around 25 to 30 meters. I wouldn't go beyond that, but you can confidently do so at that range. And what I like to do is I like to start with ADSing just to kind of grab my target, and then shift over to hip fire to get a faster strafe, a little bit more maneuverability, get into cover easier, and of course the faster rate of fire for my kill. So while for me this might not exactly be the Reach DMR I'm always expecting it to be, I can kind of alter my impossible expectations for Destiny 2 and understand that this is the closest thing to it, and now its hip fire is actually a viable option for controller within a decent amount of range. You're still gonna have to ADS with this weapon, whether it be to grab your target a little bit easier or fight consistently at range. ADS is still a main function or feature of this weapon, and if I had to be honest, I wish that kind of wasn't the case, because when I pick up this weapon, like I said, I always want to hip fire, and part of the reason for that is the 150 RPM rate of fire from the hip, and it slows down when you ADS. I wish the rate of fire was just consistent, because to me it feels really jarring going from like 150 RPM at the hip to this much slower rate of fire when ADSing. It's something that I struggle to get used to, and as much as I want to put a ton of time into this weapon and get really good at it, it's really hard to keep in mind and adjust on the fly to that rate of fire change. There's part of me that just wishes this was a 150 RPM scout so that I can have that consistency, but I think they would have to buff that archetype because the body damage on those is really bad, and that would really hurt the close range potential with hip fire of this weapon, because right now it kills with 4 body shots, whereas that would be I think 5. The time to kill would be a lot longer, so it'd be a lot worse. But again, to the point of the video and my kind of updated analysis on this feels a lot better on controller for me. This now feels like a weapon I can actually pick up and decide on if I want to put a lot of time into and master. And for those of you that have been a fan of this weapon or are looking for a pseudo scout hand cannon type weapon, high DPS of course, and good close range support, while not explicitly I guess being a hand cannon, Well, this is it. This weapon gives you all the potential to engage from pretty much whatever angle, as it's a scout rifle, but also not be afraid to play aggressively with its hipfire functionality. Sure, it's harder to get an optimal time to kill a lot of the time, even from the hip, even though I feel it's a lot more possible than it was before, but it still allows you to strafe pretty quickly, be a lot more evasive, hard to track, and land shots in a decent time because its body shot time to kill is 1.2 seconds, which is pretty in line with the 140 hand cannons. It's actually a little faster. But this is actually where it does a lot better than, say, like the BXR. This weapon gives you higher damage per shot, which actually keeps up with hand cannons a lot better because you have less time on target and you have more ability to play cover versus a pulse or a burst weapon that requires a lot more time on target and is matching the exact time to kill of a hand cannon in the case of the BXR with a lightweight archetype, which isn't ideal because that means you're purely just required to have more time on target for little to no benefit, whereas with the DMT it does a better job than the BXR competing with hand cannons simply because of its damage per shot, as it's essentially a 120 RPM hand cannon when you're ADS and then a 150 RPM hand cannon from the hip. Regardless, I think because this weapon actually lands shots from the hip consistently now on controller, I think this could develop quite well into the meta, and I'm interested to see how this develops if people will master this and start using it at a top level. I think it'd be really cool to see that personally. Once I stopped overthinking my shot and stopped trying to line it up too precisely and just started like flicking a bit more naturally from the hip, I noticed that shots were connecting and landing a lot more consistently. And when I mixed that with the ADS functionality, kind of moving between ADS and hip fire in gunfights, that's when I saw a lot of great potential with the weapon. I wish I had a high stability snapshot roll. I have a low stability snapshot roll and then a high stability killing win roll. I noticed that the higher stability roll was a lot more consistent and felt a lot better to use at the hip, which I guess makes sense considering stability was one of the buffs that they gave the weapon. I'd recommend if you're going for a roll of this now like I am to go for high stability and snapshot or Vorpal. Snapshot and Vorpal are probably the two best perks. Personally, I like snapshot. My snapshot roll felt amazing to transition between the hip fire and ADS functionality on the fly and just give myself whatever I needed in the moment, whether that was like, hey, a finishing shot to the head to make sure I land the headshot, or a better strafe speed to back into cover, whatever it might be. Mixing that functionality, I think, is the true mastery of this weapon where you unlock its potential. Snapshot lets you do that the most seamlessly, so I would go for that. Like I said, you do want to go for stability a lot, I think. I think stability is the most important on this weapon because that little bounce of recoil it does at the hip makes it quite awkward sometimes to line up shots. Combine that with things like flinch, especially hand cannon flinch, which really deter this weapon as it does many other weapons. I think you just want to prioritize trying to stay on target or stay shooting straight with little to no deviation as much as possible. And the weapon's already a scout rifle, it's already highly accurate. You can put on 2 targeting mods to also supplement that. I don't think that is a problem. Your accuracy at range I don't think is an issue. Just get it as stable as possible for consistent hipfire duels. Anyways, that is my thoughts on the DMR or DMT now on controller since the update. Try it out. Let me know what you think. I'm going to be putting more time into this weapon. I think it has a ton of potential and it's really cool. So I might try and give it a bit more of a shot at mastery. So yeah. Anyways, take it easy guys. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.